A dying widow clutched her infant daughter and whispered a plea that would tear apart an entire frontier town. "Promise me you'll raise her as your own." And the battle-scarred warrior who found her would honor that vow. But his answer would ignite a firestorm of rage, betrayal and bloodshed that no one saw coming. The desert wind carried death across the scorched plains of New Mexico territory, and Jorah Stone could smell it before he saw the wreckage. Smoke still curled from the burned wagon, its wooden frame blackened and crumbling, the canvas torn to ribbons by Apache arrows that jutted from the earth like grave markers. His horse snorted, ears pinned back, refusing to go closer. Jorah dismounted without a word, his boots hitting the dust with the weight of a man who had seen too many scenes like this, his hand already on the Colt revolver at his hip. He had been tracking a band of renegade Apache for 3 days, following their trail south from the burned-out settlement at Red Creek, where they had left 12 bodies and taken twice as many horses. The cavalry had hired him as a scout, but when the commander proved more interested in whiskey than warfare, Jorah had ridden out alone. He was used to being alone. It was safer that way, cleaner without the burden of watching other men die for causes they barely understood. The wagon sat in a shallow ravine, partially hidden by mesquite and sage. Whoever had been driving it had tried to outrun the attack, but the desert showed no mercy to the slow or the unlucky. Jorah circled the wreckage, his eyes scanning for movement, for any sign of survivors, though he expected none. The Apache had been thorough. Supplies lay scattered across the sand, torn sacks of flour spilling white across red earth, shattered crates, a woman's bonnet trampled into the dirt. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it, beneath the whisper of wind through the canyon walls. A cry, weak and desperate, the sound of something clinging to life by a thread thinner than spider silk. Jorah's hand tightened on his revolver as he moved toward the sound, his body low, every sense alert. He had learned long ago that the desert held more ways to kill a man than bullets and arrows. Snakes, scorpions, dehydration, madness, they all waited in the heat, patient as death itself. He found her behind the wagon, half buried in shadow, her body curled around something small. Blood stained the sand beneath her, dark and spreading, and her dress was torn, revealing wounds that no woman should survive. But she was still breathing, shallow gasps that rattled in her chest like the last efforts of a dying engine. Her eyes, pale blue and glassy with pain, found his face, and something flickered there. Recognition, or perhaps just relief that she would not die alone. Jorah knelt beside her, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he checked her wounds. 2 arrow wounds, one in her side, one in her shoulder. The bleeding had slowed, but only because she had so little blood left to give. He had seen enough death to know she had minutes, not hours. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only a wet gasp escaped. He leaned closer, his ear near her mouth, and finally heard the whisper that would change everything. "My baby," she breathed, the words barely more than air, shaped by dying lips. "Please, my Anna." Jorah's eyes dropped to the bundle clutched against her chest, and for the first time he saw the infant. The child was tiny, her face red and wrinkled, her mouth open in a silent cry of hunger and fear. She was alive, impossibly, miraculously alive, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket that her mother had somehow kept pressed against her chest through the attack. Through the flight, through the slow crawl toward death. "I've got her," Jorah said, his voice rough as gravel. "I'll get her to safety." The woman's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping his wrist with fingers that dug into his skin like claws. Her eyes, glazing over with the fog of approaching death, locked onto his with an intensity that burned through the pain. "No," she gasped, blood flecking her lips. "Not just safety. Promise me you'll raise her as your own." Jorah froze. He had expected her to beg him to find relatives, to take the child to a town, to an orphanage, to anyone who could care for her. But this was something else entirely. This was a claim, a binding, a vow that would tie him to this child for the rest of his life or hers. He was a warrior, a scout, a man who lived by his gun and his wits. moving from town to town, never staying, never settling, never belonging to anyone or anything. "Ma'am, I'm not the man you want for this," he said, his voice low. "I don't know the first thing about raising a child. I live rough. I've got no home, no family, nothing to offer her but danger and a life on the move." Her grip tightened, her nails drawing blood. Tears streamed down her cheeks, cutting clean lines through the dust and blood that caked her face. "My husband is dead," she whispered, each word a battle. "Killed 3 days ago when they hit our homestead. I was running, trying to reach Santa Fe, trying to reach his brother, but I won't make it. I know I won't, and I can't let her die here alone in the desert, forgotten, unmourned. Promise me." Jorah looked down at the infant, at the small, fragile life that had somehow survived when everything around her had been destroyed. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, searching blindly for the mother whose heartbeat was slowing, whose warmth was fading. Something twisted in Jorah's chest, something he had thought long dead, buried beneath years of war and violence and loss. He had killed men, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, if he counted the battles during the war. He had watched friends die, had held them as they bled out in his arms. He had become hard, cold, a weapon shaped by necessity and sharpened by survival. But this child, this tiny, helpless creature, she asked nothing of him except the most impossible thing: to care, to protect, to become something he had never been. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marianne," she breathed. "Marianne Cole, and she's Anna. Anna Cole. Promise me you'll keep her name. Promise me she'll know who her mother was, even if I can't be there to tell her." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains, a rain that would never reach this parched earth in time to save her. Jorah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. He could lie, could promise anything to ease her dying, and then ride away, leave the child at the nearest town, let someone else shoulder the responsibility. But as he looked into Marianne Cole's eyes, he knew he could not do that. Whatever else he had become, whatever darkness had claimed parts of his soul, he was not a man who broke his word. "I promise," he said, the words falling from his lips like stones dropped into a well, sinking down into depths he could not measure. "I'll raise her as my own. She'll know your name, and she'll know you loved her enough to fight for her until your last breath." Marianne's face softened, the pain easing from her features as if his words had lifted some unbearable weight. She released his wrist and reached up, her trembling fingers touching his bearded face, with a gentleness that startled him. "Thank you," she whispered. "God bless you, Jorah Stone." He had not told her his name. The realization hit him like a fist to the gut. She could not have known it, and yet she had spoken it as clearly as if they had been introduced in a church social. He opened his mouth to ask how she knew, but her hand had already fallen, her eyes staring past him now, fixed on something he could not see. Her chest rose one final time, held for a moment that stretched into eternity, and then fell still. Jorah Stone sat in the dust beside a dead woman he had never met, holding an infant who was now his by a vow he could not break. And for the first time in 10 years, he wept. The tears came hot and sudden, cutting through the dust on his face, falling onto the baby's blanket as she began to cry, her small voice rising into the empty sky. He gathered her close, wrapping his coat around her tiny body, and stood on unsteady legs. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and fire. He had to move, had to get the child to water, to shelter, to safety. But first, he did what he could for Marianne Cole. He carried her body to a shaded spot beneath a twisted juniper tree, wrapped her in the cleanest blanket he could find in the wreckage, and covered her with stones to keep the scavengers away. He carved her name into the tree's bark with his knife, along with the date and a simple prayer he remembered from childhood. It was not much, but it was all he could give her. Anna cried the entire time, her small lungs working with surprising strength. Jorah fashioned a sling from a piece of canvas and tied the baby against his chest, her warmth pressing against his heart. He searched the wagon for anything useful, finding a few supplies that had survived, a water skin, some dried meat, a small tin of condensed milk. He had no idea how to feed an infant, but he would figure it out or die trying. He mounted his horse carefully, one hand supporting the baby, and turned south toward the distant town of Redemption Ridge, 3 days' ride if he pushed hard. The horse moved slowly, sensing the precious cargo, and Jorah found himself talking to the child in low, soothing tones, words he had not spoken since his own mother died when he was barely older than Anna was now. "You're going to make it, little one," he murmured. "I don't know how, and I don't know what kind of life I can give you, but I made your mother a promise, and I keep my promises." The first night was the hardest. He made camp in a sheltered canyon, built a small fire, and tried to feed Anna with a rag soaked in diluted condensed milk. She fought at first, crying and turning her head away, but hunger finally won, and she sucked weakly at the cloth. Jorah held her through the long hours of darkness, her tiny body trembling against his chest, her breath coming in small, frightened gasps. He sang to her, old war songs and hymns he barely remembered, his rough voice cracking on notes he could not reach. By dawn, she had quieted, her small fist wrapped around his finger, her eyes closed in exhausted sleep. Jorah looked down at her, at the trust written in her peaceful face, and felt something shift inside him, some frozen part of his heart beginning to thaw. He had thought himself beyond redemption, beyond the reach of anything soft or good. But this child, this impossible burden and blessing, she demanded something from him that no enemy ever had. She demanded that he become worthy of her trust. The second day brought new challenges. Anna's crying grew weaker, her skin taking on a pallor that terrified him. He knew nothing about babies, about their needs, their fragility, the 100 ways they could slip from life into death. He pushed his horse harder, stopping only to wet the rag and coax a few drops of milk into her mouth. The sun beat down mercilessly, and he shielded her with his body, his own lips cracking from thirst, his throat raw. On the third day, he saw the buildings of Redemption Ridge rising from the desert like a mirage. The town sat at the base of red stone cliffs, a collection of wooden structures that had grown up around a silver mine that had played out years ago. What remained was a hard-scrabble community of ranchers, drifters, and those too stubborn or too broken to move on. Jorah had been through Redemption Ridge before, knew some of the faces, knew the sheriff and the preacher and the woman who ran the boarding house, but as he rode down the main street, Anna still clutched against his chest. He felt every eye turned toward him. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Shopkeepers stepped out onto the boardwalk. Children pointed and whispered. By the time he reached the boarding house, a crowd had formed, their faces filled with curiosity and suspicion. Jorah dismounted slowly, his body aching from 3 days in the saddle without rest. He turned to face the crowd, and the weight of their stares pressed against him like physical force. He knew what they were thinking, what they were wondering. Where had the baby come from? Whose child was she? And what right did a man like Jorah Stone, a warrior with blood on his hands and a reputation for violence, have to be carrying an infant through the desert? Sheriff Wade Callahan pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his gun belt, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Jorah," he said, his voice flat, "that's quite a sight. You want to tell us where you got that baby?" Jorah met his gaze without flinching. "Found her 3 days north. Apache attack. Her mother died asking me to raise her." A murmur ran through the crowd, disbelief and shock mingling in equal measure. A woman's voice called out, sharp with accusation. "You expect us to believe a dying woman asked you to take her child? A man like you," the words hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Jorah Stone stood in the center of Redemption Ridge's dusty main street. The infant Anna pressed against his chest, and felt the weight of judgment crushing down on him like the desert sun at high noon. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people now, drawn by the spectacle of a hardened warrior cradling a baby, drawn by the scent of scandal and tragedy that hung in the air thicker than the dust kicked up by his horse's hooves. Sheriff Wade Callahan stepped closer, his hands still resting on his gun belt, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "A man like you," he repeated, letting the words sink in. "You've been in this territory for what, 5 years now? And in all that time we've known you as a scout, a tracker, a gun for hire. You've killed men, Jorah, we all know it. And now you ride into town with a baby and expect us to believe some dying woman handed her over to you." The crowd murmured agreement, the sound rolling through them like distant thunder. Jorah could see it in their faces, the doubt, the fear, the certainty that something dark lurked beneath his story. He had lived his life on the edges of civilization, moving through towns like a ghost, never staying long enough to plant roots, never opening himself to scrutiny. And now that choice, that deliberate isolation, had become a weapon turned against him. "I don't expect anything," Jorah said, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. "I'm telling you what happened. Her name was Marianne Cole. She and her husband were homesteading north of Red Creek when the Apache hit them. He died 3 days before I found her. She was trying to reach Santa Fe, trying to reach his brother, but she didn't make it. The attack on her wagon, that's what finished her. And with her last breath, she asked me to raise this child as my own." A woman pushed forward from the crowd, her face lined with age and suspicion, her grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. Martha Cunningham ran the general store and knew every piece of gossip that moved through Redemption Ridge. "And you just happened to be there," she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Just happened to find her dying. Just happened to be the one she gave her last words to." "That's mighty convenient, Mr. Stone." Jorah's jaw tightened. "There's nothing convenient about watching a woman die. Nothing convenient about trying to keep an infant alive through 3 days of desert heat with nothing but condensed milk and a water skin. If you think I wanted this, if you think I asked for it, you're wrong. Then why keep her?" The question came from a tall man standing at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed over his chest. Jorah recognized him. Garrett Hollis, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory, a man whose wealth gave him the kind of power that could shape a town's future. If you didn't want the responsibility, why not leave her at the nearest settlement? Why bring her here? The question struck deeper than Hollis intended. Jorah had asked himself the same thing 100 times over the past 3 days. During the long nights when Anna cried and he had no way to soothe her, during the brutal hours when the sun beat down, and he wondered if they would both die in the desert. He could have left her at Fort Stanton, could have handed her to the army doctor or the chaplain's wife, could have walked away clean, but he had made a promise. And that promise, spoken over the body of a dying woman whose eyes had burned with desperate hope, had bound him more surely than chains or rope or iron bars. "Because I gave my word," Jorah said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife through cloth. "Marianne Cole asked me to raise her daughter, and I said yes. That's all there is to it." "That's not all there is to it," a new voice interjected, smooth and cultured, carrying the weight of education and authority. Reverend Samuel Hayes stepped forward, his black coat immaculate despite the dust, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light. He was a man who had come west from Boston, bringing with him the certainty of Eastern religion and Eastern morality, and he wielded both like weapons. A child's welfare is not a matter of simple promises made in extremis. This infant requires proper care, a stable home, a mother's touch. What can you offer her, Mr. Stone? A life on the trail? A succession of campfires and hardship? That is no life for a child. The crowd shifted, nodding agreement. Jorah felt the tide turning against him, felt the town closing ranks, preparing to take Anna from him for her own good. He looked down at the baby, at her small face peaceful in sleep, trusting him completely, and felt rage kindle in his chest. "I can offer her life," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "which is more than she would have had if I'd left her in that desert. And I can offer her the knowledge that her mother's last wish was honored, that someone cared enough to keep a promise even when it cost him everything." "Noble words," Garrett Hollis said. stepping forward to stand beside the Reverend. But words don't feed babies. Words don't keep them warm at night or teach them right from wrong. My wife and I have been blessed with means, but cursed with barrenness. We have a home, resources, everything a child could need. Let us take her. Let us give her the life her mother would have wanted. The offer hung in the air, reasonable and generous, backed by wealth and respectability. Jorah saw the calculation in Hollis's eyes, the way he looked at Anna not as a child, but as an opportunity, a chance to cement his legacy, to soften his reputation as a hard man who ruled his ranch with an iron fist. This was not about Anna's welfare. This was about power, about control, about a wealthy man getting what he wanted, because he always got what he wanted. "No," Jorah said flatly. The single word fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the crowd. Hollis's face darkened, his jaw clenching. "You would refuse my generosity? You would condemn this child to poverty and hardship when I offer her everything?" "You offer her your name and your money," Jorah shot back. "But her mother gave her a name already. Anna Cole. And she asked me, not you, not the Reverend, not anyone else in this town, to raise her. That means something." Sheriff Callahan held up a hand, trying to restore order as voices rose in argument. Some supported Jorah, moved by his determination, by the raw emotion in his voice. Others sided with Hollis, swayed by practical concerns, by the obvious advantages of wealth and stability. The debate raged, escalating into shouting matches. Neighbors turning against neighbors, the fragile peace of the town fracturing along lines of sympathy and suspicion. Finally, Callahan drew his pistol and fired a shot into the air. The crack of gunfire silenced the crowd instantly, all eyes turning to the sheriff. "Enough!" he barked. "This isn't getting us anywhere. Jorah, you'll come to my office. We'll sort this out properly with testimony and evidence. The rest of you go about your business." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, breaking into small groups that continued arguing in hushed tones. Jorah followed Callahan toward the sheriff's office. Anna still clutched against his chest, her tiny fist wrapped around a fold of his shirt. He could feel eyes following him, could hear the whispers that would grow into rumors, into accusations, into a story that bore little resemblance to the truth. Inside the office, Callahan gestured to a chair, but Jorah remained standing. The sheriff sighed, settling behind his desk, his hand rubbing his weathered face. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Jorah. You know that—" "I know I kept a promise," Jorah replied. "A promise that's going to tear this town apart if we're not careful," Callahan said. "Garrett Hollis is not a man who takes no for an answer. He's got influence, connections, money enough to make your life hell if he decides to. And the Reverend, he's got the church behind him, half the women in town hanging on his every word. You're standing alone against powerful men." "I've stood against worse," Jorah said quietly. Callahan studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you found that woman. I believe she died. But Jorah, belief isn't enough. If Hollis pushes this, if he demands proof, what do you have? A story about a woman nobody in this town knew, dying in a place nobody can verify, making a request nobody heard but you. That's not evidence. That's just your word against his money." The door burst open before Jorah could respond. A woman strode in, her skirts dusty from travel, her face flushed with exertion. Elena Vasquez ran the boarding house, a widow herself who had survived the Mexican War, the loss of her husband, and the brutal early years of Redemption Ridge through sheer determination and a will that bent for no man. She had always treated Jorah with a gruff kindness, one survivor recognizing another. "Wade Callahan, you should be ashamed," she snapped, her accent thickening with anger. "This man brings a baby 3 days through the desert, and you treat him like a criminal. Where is your humanity?" "Elena, this isn't your concern," Callahan began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "A child's welfare is everyone's concern," she fired back. She turned to Jorah, her expression softening as she looked at Anna. "This baby needs proper care. Not accusations, not politics. Care. Bring her to my house. I'll help you. Jorah felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Don't thank me yet," Elena replied. "You've made enemies today, and they won't stop just because one old woman offers to help. But at least the baby will be fed and warm tonight. Come." She led him out through the back door, avoiding the lingering crowds on the main street. Her boarding house sat at the edge of town, a sturdy adobe structure with a shaded courtyard and the smell of cooking food drifting from the kitchen. Inside, she cleared a table and gestured for Jorah to lay Anna down. "Let me see her," Elena commanded, her hands already reaching for the baby. Jorah hesitated, then carefully unwrapped Anna from her makeshift sling. The baby stirred, whimpering, her face scrunching with discomfort. Elena's experienced hands moved over her with gentle efficiency, checking for injuries, for signs of dehydration or illness. "She's stronger than she looks," Elena murmured. "But she needs milk, real milk, not that condensed nonsense. And she needs to be bathed, changed, held properly. You did well to keep her alive, Jorah, but now she needs more than survival. She needs care, over the next hour." Elena worked with quiet competence, showing Jorah how to hold Anna, how to feed her from a bottle. She improvised from a medicine dropper and a small glass container, how to check for fever and recognize signs of distress. Jorah watched, committing every detail to memory, his large hands awkward but gentle as he learned to support Anna's head, to angle the bottle so she wouldn't choke, to burp her by patting her back in small circles. "You're learning," Elena said, a note of approval in her voice. "That's good. But Jorah, you need to understand what you've taken on. This isn't like tracking a man or surviving in the desert. A baby needs constant attention day and night for years. Your life as you knew it, it's over." "I know," Jorah said quietly, looking down at Anna as she sucked hungrily at the bottle. Her eyes had opened, dark and alert, fixing on his face with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so small. "I knew it the moment I made that promise." A knock at the door interrupted them. Elena opened it to find Martha Cunningham standing on the threshold, her expression stern, but her hands holding a basket covered with a clean cloth. "I brought diapers," she said abruptly, "and some clothes that belong to my granddaughter. The baby will need them." Eleanor took the basket, surprise flickering across her face. "Thank you, Martha." "That's kind." "It's not kindness," Martha said sharply. "It's practicality. Whatever I think of Jorah Stone, that baby didn't ask to be orphaned, and she doesn't deserve to suffer for adult decisions. But don't mistake my charity for approval. I still think Garrett Hollis is right. That child needs a proper home." She left without waiting for a response. Elena closed the door slowly, shaking her head. "This town is divided, Jorah, you see that. Some will help because they believe in keeping promises, in honoring a dying woman's wish. Others will fight you because they think they know better, because they can't imagine a man like you raising a child." "What do you think?" Jorah asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching as he carefully burped Anna, his rough hands cradling her with surprising tenderness. "I think you're going to break, or you're going to become something you never imagined you could be. And I don't know which scares me more." That night, Jorah slept in a small room Elena provided, Anna in a makeshift cradle beside his bed. He woke every few hours to her cries, learning to distinguish between hunger and discomfort, between fear and simple need for reassurance. Each time he lifted her, each time he soothed her back to sleep, he felt the promise settling deeper into his bones, becoming part of him in ways he couldn't articulate. But outside, in the darkness of Redemption Ridge, Garrett Hollis sat in his ranch house office, a glass of whiskey in his hand and fury in his eyes. His wife Sarah sat across from him, her face pale and hopeful. "We could give her everything," Sarah whispered. "A real home, a mother's love, education, opportunity." "Surely he'll see reason." "He won't," Garrett said flatly. "I saw it in his eyes. He's dug in, stubborn as a mule. He thinks that promise means something, that it gives him rights he doesn't have. Then what do we do?" Sarah asked. Garrett's smile was cold and calculating. "We show the town what kind of man Jorah Stone really is. We dig into his past. We find the bodies he's buried, the blood on his hands. We make them see that a killer has no business raising a child. And if that doesn't work, we'll find another way. I always do. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He stood, draining his whiskey, his mind already working through possibilities, through connections he could leverage, through pressure he could apply. Garrett Hollis had built his empire through ruthless determination, through the willingness to do whatever necessary to get what he wanted. And he wanted that child, wanted the respectability she would bring, wanted to prove that his wealth and power could shape reality itself. The next morning, Jorah woke to find a crowd gathered outside Elena's boarding house. Sheriff Callahan stood at the forefront, his face grim, a folded paper in his hand. "Jorah," he called out, "you need to see this." Jorah stepped outside, Anna wrapped in a clean blanket that Martha Cunningham had provided. He took the paper from Callahan's hand and unfolded it, his eyes scanning the text. It was a notice, official and legal, signed by Garrett Hollis and countersigned by Reverend Hayes. It claimed that Jorah Stone was unfit to care for an infant, citing his violent past, his transient lifestyle, and the lack of any verifiable proof regarding Marianne Cole's dying wish. The notice demanded a formal hearing before the town council in 3 days, where evidence would be presented and a decision made regarding Anna's permanent placement. Until then, the notice suggested, the child should be placed in the temporary care of a respectable family, specifically the Hollis household, to ensure her safety and proper care. Jorah's hands tightened on the paper, crumpling its edges. He looked up at Callahan, at the crowd behind him, at the mixture of sympathy and satisfaction on their faces. "This is what justice looks like in Redemption Ridge?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "This is what the law looks like," Callahan replied. "I'm sorry, Jorah, but you've got 3 days to prove your case. And if you can't, the council will decide Anna's future." "That's how it has to be." Jorah looked down at Anna, at her small face peaceful in sleep, trusting him completely. He thought of Marianne Cole dying in the desert, thought of her final words, thought of the promise that had changed everything. 3 days! He had 3 days to prove that a dying woman's last wish meant more than money and power and the comfortable prejudices of people who had never faced death in the desert. "Then I'll use them," he said, his voice hard as iron, "and when this is over, everyone in this town will know the truth." But as he turned to go back inside, he felt the weight of what lay ahead. Garrett Hollis was a formidable enemy, backed by wealth and influence and the respectability that came with both. The Reverend would use moral authority to paint Jorah as unfit, as dangerous, as a threat to the very child he had sworn to protect. And the town, divided and uncertain, would watch it all unfold like a spectacle, a drama played out for their entertainment and judgment. Elena touched his arm as he passed her in the doorway. "You'll need allies," she said quietly, "and evidence. If Marianne Cole had family in Santa Fe, if you can find them, if you can prove her story, you might have a chance." Jorah nodded slowly, his mind already racing through possibilities. Santa Fe was a week's ride, too far to make the journey and return in 3 days. But there had to be another way, some piece of proof he had overlooked, some thread he could pull that would unravel Hollis's carefully constructed case. He spent the rest of the day caring for Anna, learning from Elena, soaking up every scrap of knowledge about feeding and changing and soothing. But his mind never stopped working, never stopped searching for the evidence that would save them both. As night fell and Anna slept in her cradle, Jorah sat by the window, watching the lights of Redemption Ridge flicker in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Garrett Hollis was plotting his next move. Somewhere out there, the town was choosing sides, drawing lines, preparing for a battle that would determine not just Anna's future, but the soul of Redemption Ridge itself. And Jorah Stone, a warrior who had faced death more times than he could count, prepared to fight the hardest battle of his life, not with guns or fists, but with truth and conviction, and the desperate hope that a promise meant something in a world that had forgotten how to believe in anything. Dawn broke over Redemption Ridge with the kind of stillness that precedes storms, the air heavy and expectant, as if the town itself held its breath waiting for the battle to begin. Jorah Stone had not slept. He sat in the small room Elena Vasquez had provided, Anna cradled in his arms, watching the infant's chest rise and fall with each precious breath. The notice from Garrett Hollis lay on the table beside him, its words burned into his memory like a brand. 3 days. He had 3 days to prove that a dying woman's wish carried more weight than wealth and respectability. 3 days to convince a town that had already made up its mind that a warrior could become a father. The impossibility of it pressed against him, but he had faced impossible odds before, had survived battles where death seemed certain, had walked away from situations that should have ended him. This was different, though. This time, he was not fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for Anna's future. Elena appeared in the doorway, her face lined with exhaustion and determination. She carried a tray with coffee and bread, setting it down without ceremony. "You look like death warmed over," she said bluntly. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday, I think," Jorah replied, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Think won't keep you standing," Eleanor said, pushing the tray toward him. "Eat. The baby needs you strong, not collapsing from hunger and stupidity." He managed a thin smile at her characteristic bluntness, shifting Anna carefully so he could reach for the coffee. The bitter liquid burned down his throat, chasing away some of the fog that had settled over his thoughts. "I need to find proof," he said. "Something that shows Marianne Cole was real, that her dying wish was real. Hollis and the Reverend are going to paint me as a liar or worse at that hearing. They've already started," Eleanor said grimly. She pulled a crumpled newspaper from her apron pocket and tossed it onto the table. The Redemption Ridge Gazette, a weekly publication run by a printer named Thomas Garvey, who had strong ties to Garrett Hollis through business loans and personal favors. The headline screamed across the front page, "Drifter claims divine right to orphan child." Jorah's jaw tightened as he scanned the article. It painted him as a dangerous opportunist, a man with a violent past who had somehow acquired an infant through suspicious means. It quoted anonymous sources suggesting he might have stolen the child, or worse, been involved in the mother's death. There was no mention of Marianne Cole by name, no acknowledgement of her dying wish. Just carefully worded insinuations designed to poison public opinion without making specific accusations that could be disproven. "Hollis works fast," Jorah said, his voice flat. "He's been working since the moment you refused him," Elena replied. "You embarrassed him in front of the whole town, and men like Garrett Hollis don't forgive embarrassment. He's spreading rumors, calling in favors, making sure that when the hearing comes, the council will have no choice but to rule in his favor." Anna stirred in Jorah's arms, her small face scrunching with discomfort. He adjusted his hold automatically, the motion becoming more natural with each repetition, and began the gentle rocking that Elena had taught him. The baby settled, her tiny fist wrapping around his thumb with surprising strength. "There's something else," Elena continued, her tone darker. "Last night someone tried to break into this house. I heard them at the back door, fumbling with the lock. When I shouted and grabbed my shotgun, they ran. But Jorah, I don't think they were thieves. I think someone wanted to take Anna while you slept." Cold fury flooded through Jorah's veins. His free hand moved instinctively to where his gun belt would normally hang, but he had removed it while caring for the baby, leaving the weapon on the far table. "Did you see who it was?" "Too dark," Elena said. "But I have my suspicions. Hollis has men who do his dirty work, ranch hands who are more thugs than cowboys. If he can't get the baby through legal means, he'll try other methods." Jorah stood, pacing the small room with Anna still cradled against his chest. His mind raced through possibilities, through defensive measures, through the realization that every moment Anna stayed in Redemption Ridge put her in danger. "I could leave," he said quietly. Take her and ride out tonight. Head to California or Oregon, somewhere Hollis's reach can't find us, and prove every accusation he's making." Eleanor countered sharply. "Running makes you look guilty, makes it seem like you have something to hide. And more than that, it makes Marianne Cole's dying wish meaningless. She asked you to raise Anna, not to run with her like a fugitive. If you want to honor that promise, you stay and fight." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Elena moved toward it cautiously, one hand on the shotgun she kept near the entrance. She opened the door a crack, then wider, surprise crossing her face. "Sheriff Callahan, it's early for official visits." Wade Callahan stepped inside, removing his hat, his weathered face troubled. His eyes found Jorah, then dropped to Anna sleeping peacefully in the warrior's arms.
"I'm not here officially," he said.
"I'm here because I need you to understand what you're up against. I understand Hollis wants the baby and will do anything to get her," Jorah said. "It's more than that," Callahan replied. He pulled a chair out and sat heavily, the weight of his position evident in every movement. "Garrett Hollis has been building his case carefully. He's got witnesses lined up who will testify to your violent past, to times you've solved problems with your fists or your gun. He's got the Reverend ready to speak about moral fitness and Christian duty. And he's got Sarah Hollis prepared to appear before the council, to talk about her barrenness and her desperate desire for a child, to paint herself as the grieving almost mother who can give Anna everything you cannot. All of that is theater," Jorah said. "It doesn't change the truth. Truth matters less than you think when it's your word against a wealthy man's money." Callahan said bluntly. "I believe you, Jorah. I believe you found that woman dying, that she made you promise to raise her daughter. But belief isn't enough. The council needs proof, and Hollis is making sure you can't provide it." "What do you mean?" Elena asked sharply. Callahan's expression darkened. "I sent a telegram to Fort Stanton yesterday, asking if they had any record of Apache attacks in the area you described, any reports of homesteaders named Cole. This morning I got a response. The telegraph lines north of Red Creek have been cut. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Jorah felt the walls closing in. Without telegraph communication, he couldn't verify his story, couldn't prove that Marianne and her husband had existed, couldn't demonstrate that the attack had happened as he described. Hollis had systematically cut off every avenue of proof, leaving Jorah isolated with nothing but his word. "There has to be another way," Eleanor said. "What about the wagon? The site where he found her? If Jorah takes the council there, shows them the grave, 3 days ride north and 3 days back," Callahan said. "The hearing is in 2 days now. There's not enough time, and Hollis knows it. He's boxed you in perfectly." Anna woke with a cry, her small voice filling the room with urgent need. Jorah moved automatically, checking her diaper, finding it wet, beginning the process Elena had taught him of cleaning and changing her with supplies Martha Cunningham had grudgingly provided. His hands worked with growing competence while his mind churned through possibilities. "Then I'll speak at the hearing," he said. "I'll tell the council exactly what happened, every detail. I'll make them see the truth." "Words won't be enough," Callahan said wearily. "Not against Hollis's money and influence. You need evidence, witnesses, something concrete that can stand against his campaign." The door burst open without warning. A young man stumbled in, his clothes covered in trail dust, his face flushed with exertion. Jorah recognized him as Billy Fletcher, a rider who carried messages between towns for anyone who could pay. "Sheriff," Billy gasped, "I rode through the night from Santa Fe. Got a telegram that came through on the southern line before someone cut it too." He thrust a crumpled paper toward Callahan. The sheriff unfolded it, his eyes scanning quickly, then widening. "It's from the Territorial Marshal's office," he said slowly. "A woman filed a missing person report 3 weeks ago. Her brother and his wife, John and Marianne Cole, failed to arrive in Santa Fe as planned. The brother's name is Daniel Cole. He's asking for any information about their whereabouts." Silence filled the room, broken only by Anna's soft gurgles as Jorah finished changing her. Elena spoke first, her voice tight with barely contained triumph. "That's your proof. That woman was real, her husband was real, and they were traveling to Santa Fe exactly as you said." "It's a start," Callahan agreed. "But Hollis will argue it doesn't prove she gave you the baby, doesn't prove her dying wish. He'll say you could have stolen the child from them, killed them both, manufactured the whole story." "Then I need to reach Daniel Cole," Jorah said. "If he knows his brother and sister-in-law, if he can describe Marianne, describe the baby, it corroborates my story." "Santa Fe is a week away," Elena said. "Even if you left now—" "I can't leave Anna," Jorah interrupted. "And I won't risk taking her on another brutal ride through territory that's still seeing Apache raids." Billy Fletcher stepped forward, his young face earnest. "I can ride to Santa Fe in 4 days if I push hard and change horses at the relay stations. I can bring Daniel Cole back here, or at least get a sworn statement from him. If the sheriff here writes an official request—" Callahan was already reaching for paper and pen. "I'll do better than that. I'll send a telegram south through the line that's still working. Get word to the marshal's office directly. They can bring Daniel Cole north under armed escort if needed." Hope flickered in Jorah's chest, fragile as a candle flame in wind. It was not a guarantee, not even close, but it was something, a thread of possibility that could unravel Hollis's carefully woven web of lies. How long before Cole could reach Redemption Ridge? "If everything goes perfectly, 5 days, Callahan said. "The hearing is in 2 days. I can try to delay it, claim I need more time to investigate, but Hollis will push back hard. The best I might manage is another day or 2. "Then we use that time," Elena said firmly. "We build support in the town. There are people who believe Jorah, people who remember what it means to keep a promise. We organize them, make sure their voices are heard at the hearing." Over the next 2 days, Redemption Ridge became a battlefield fought not with guns, but with words and loyalties. Elena Vasquez moved through the town like a general marshalling troops, visiting homes, attending church gatherings, speaking quietly but firmly about honor and integrity and the importance of standing by one's word. She found allies in unexpected places. Martha Cunningham, despite her initial skepticism, began defending Jorah in her general store, pointing out that he had kept Anna alive through 3 days of desert heat when most men would have failed. Dr. Abraham Walsh, the town physician who had treated Jorah's wounds after various fights and skirmishes, spoke of the warrior's fundamental decency despite his violent profession. Even some of Hollis's own ranch hands, men who knew their boss's ruthlessness firsthand, began quietly expressing doubts about his motivations, but Hollis countered every move. He increased wages for his loyal men, binding them tighter with money. He made generous donations to Reverend Hayes's church-building fund, ensuring the preacher's continued support. He hosted dinners for the town council members, subtle displays of wealth and power that reminded them where their interests lay. Jorah spent those days learning to care for Anna with growing skill and confidence. Elena taught him everything she knew, from recognizing the different types of cries, to understanding sleep patterns, to preparing formula that Anna could digest without discomfort. He walked through Redemption Ridge openly, the baby strapped against his chest in a sling Elena had fashioned, meeting the stares of townspeople with calm dignity. Some spat as he passed. Others nodded with respect. Most simply watched, uncertain, waiting to see how the drama would resolve itself. Anna seemed oblivious to the tension, her small world consisting entirely of Jorah's heartbeat and the warmth of his body and the rhythm of his voice as he spoke to her constantly, telling her stories of her mother's courage, making promises about the future they would build together. On the morning of the hearing, Jorah dressed carefully in the only clean clothes he owned, a simple shirt and pants that Elena had washed and pressed. He strapped his gun belt on for the first time since arriving in Redemption Ridge. the weight of the colt, familiar and somehow reassuring despite knowing he could not draw it in the council chambers. Anna wore a small dress that Martha Cunningham had brought sewn from flour sacks but clean and presentable. The town hall was packed when Jorah entered, every bench filled, people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. The air smelled of sweat and tobacco and the kind of nervous energy that precedes violence. Garrett Hollis sat at the front with his wife Sarah, both dressed in their finest, projecting an image of respectable wealth and stability. Reverend Hayes sat beside them, his Bible open on his lap, his expression radiating moral certainty. The town council consisted of 5 members: Sheriff Callahan, Judge Harlan Pierce, who served as chairman, and 3 prominent citizens including the bank manager, the largest merchant, and a successful rancher. Judge Pierce was an older man, white-haired and stern, known for fairness but also for rigid adherence to law and propriety. He gavelled the room to order, the sharp crack silencing the murmurs. "We're here to determine the proper placement of the infant known as Anna Cole," Pierce announced, his voice carrying authority. "Mr. Garrett Hollis has petitioned the council to remove the child from Jorah Stone's custody and place her with his family. Mr. Stone contests this petition. We will hear testimony from both sides, examine evidence, and render a decision that serves the child's best interests." Hollis stood first, his bearing confident, his voice smooth as polished leather. He spoke of his wealth, his stable home, the opportunities he could provide. He presented Sarah, who wept artfully as she described her longing for a child, her readiness to provide maternal love. He called witnesses who testified to Jorah's violent past, to bar fights and shootouts, to the life of a drifter who moved from town to town, leaving bodies behind. Reverend Hayes spoke eloquently about moral fitness and Christian duty, about the importance of raising a child in a proper household with both father and mother, about the dangers of allowing a man accustomed to violence to shape a young girl's character. His words carried weight with the crowd, heads nodding in agreement. Then it was Jorah's turn. He stood slowly, Anna cradled in his arms, and faced the council. The room fell silent, waiting. He had rehearsed no speech, prepared no elaborate defense. He simply told the truth. He described finding Marianne Cole dying in the desert, her body broken, but her will unshakable. He recounted her final words, the plea that had bound him, the promise he had made. He spoke of the 3-day journey to Redemption Ridge, of keeping Anna alive through heat and hunger and his own desperate ignorance. He showed them the telegram from Santa Fe, the proof that the Coles were real people who had vanished exactly as he claimed. "I'm not a perfect man," Jorah said, his voice steady. "I've killed, I've fought, I've lived rough. But I gave my word to a dying woman, and that word is all I have. If you take Anna from me, you're not just separating us. You're saying that promises don't matter, that a mother's dying wish means nothing against money and respectability. Is that the precedent you want to set?" The room erupted in argument, voices clashing, the carefully maintained order dissolving into chaos. Judge Pierce gavelled repeatedly, shouting for silence. When quiet finally returned, he leaned forward, his face grave. "This council will deliberate and render a decision within the hour," he announced. "Until then, the child remains with Mr. Stone. Court is adjourned." The council members filed into a back room while the crowd milled restlessly. Jorah stood alone near the front, Anna sleeping peacefully against his shoulder, seemingly unaware that her entire future hung in the balance. Elena pushed through the crowd to stand beside him, her hand touching his arm briefly in silent support. The hour stretched into 2, then 3. The sun climbed toward its zenith, heat building in the packed hall. People grew restless, angry, the tension ratcheting higher with each passing minute. Finally, the council members emerged, their faces grim and troubled. Judge Pierce took his seat. cleared his throat, and began to speak, his words about to shatter everything Jorah Stone had fought for. Judge Harlan Pierce's weathered hands gripped the gavel as he surveyed the packed town hall, his eyes moving across faces tight with anticipation and judgment. The silence stretched like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap. Jorah Stone stood near the front, Anna sleeping against his shoulder, her small body rising and falling with each breath, oblivious to the storm about to break over them both. Elena Vasquez remained at his side, her chin raised defiantly, while across the aisle Garrett Hollis sat with his wife Sarah, their expressions carefully composed masks of righteous confidence. "This council has deliberated at length," Pierce began, his voice carrying the weight of years spent dispensing frontier justice. "We have heard testimony from both parties, examined what evidence exists, and considered the welfare of the child above all other concerns. This is not a decision we make lightly." He paused, and in that pause the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Jorah felt his heart hammering against his ribs, felt Anna's warmth against his chest, felt the promise he had made to Marianne Cole burning in his mind like a brand. Everything he had fought for, everything he had become since that moment in the desert, hung suspended in the silence. However, Pierce continued, and the single word fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of dread through Jorah's body. "We find ourselves troubled by the lack of concrete evidence supporting Mr. Stone's account. While the telegram from Santa Fe confirms that a couple named John and Marianne Cole did fail to arrive as expected, it does not prove the circumstances Mr. Stone describes. It does not prove that Mrs. Cole made the request he claims. It does not establish beyond reasonable doubt that he has any legitimate claim to this child." Murmurs swept through the crowd, some nodding agreement, others shaking their heads in dismay. Hollis's face flickered with barely suppressed triumph, while Sarah clutched his arm, her eyes bright with tears that might have been genuine or calculated. Jorah felt the ground shifting beneath him, felt the walls closing in. But he forced himself to remain still, to keep breathing, to hold Anna gently, despite the fury building in his chest. "Furthermore," Pierce said, raising his voice to silence the murmurs, "we must consider the child's long-term welfare. Mr. Stone, whatever his intentions, leads a transient life. He has no permanent residence, no stable income, no family support. While he has demonstrated a certain competence in caring for the infant over recent days, competence in the short term does not guarantee suitability for raising a child to adulthood." "This is a farce," a voice rang out from the crowd. Dr. Abraham Walsh stood, his medical bag still in hand, as if he had come straight from a house call. "You're letting Hollis's money decide this case, not justice or truth." Pierce's gavel cracked down. "Dr. Walsh, you will remain silent or be removed from these proceedings." "Remove me then," Walsh shot back, his face flushed with anger. "Because I won't sit quietly while you hand a child over to a man who wants her as a trophy, who sees her as a way to polish his reputation. I've treated Jorah Stone's wounds more than once, and I've seen what kind of man he is. He's honest, he keeps his word, and he's shown more genuine care for that baby in 5 days than Hollis has shown for anything in his life that he can't buy or control." The room erupted. Supporters of both sides shouted over each other, accusations flew, and the carefully maintained decorum dissolved into chaos. Pierce hammered his gavel repeatedly, his face darkening with fury, but the crowd had moved beyond his control. Sheriff Callahan stood, his hand on his pistol, a warning that brought a momentary hush. "The next person who speaks out of turn will spend the night in jail," Callahan announced, his voice cutting through the tension. "Judge Pierce has the floor." Pierce straightened his papers with deliberate slowness, reasserting his authority through careful precision. "As I was saying before the interruption, this council must prioritize the child's welfare. To that end, we have reached a decision." The door to the town hall burst open before he could continue. A man stumbled in, covered in trail dust, his face burned dark by sun and wind, his clothes stained with the evidence of hard riding. Behind him came two mounted cavalry soldiers in Union blue, their presence commanding immediate attention. The entire room turned as one, conversations dying mid-sentence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "I'm looking for Judge Pierce," the dust-covered man said, his voice hoarse but determined. "I'm Daniel Cole. I was told my brother and his wife were killed, and that someone here has my niece." Silence crashed down like a fallen tree. Jorah felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of tension he had been carrying since the hearing began. Daniel Cole was here, impossibly, miraculously here, 3 days earlier than anyone had thought possible. The man's eyes swept the room until they found Jorah, found the baby sleeping against his shoulder, and Daniel's weathered face crumpled with a mixture of grief and recognition. "That's Anna," Daniel whispered, moving forward as if pulled by invisible strings. "That's my brother's daughter. I'd know her anywhere. She has Marianne's eyes, John's chin." Pierce recovered from his shock first. "Mr. Cole, this is highly irregular. You cannot simply—" "I can and I will," Daniel interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "I've ridden 4 days straight with these cavalry soldiers as escort after receiving Sheriff Callahan's telegram. I've barely slept, barely eaten, because I needed to know what happened to my family. And now you're going to tell me everything." Callahan stood, gesturing for Daniel to approach the council table. "This is Daniel Cole, the brother mentioned in the Santa Fe telegram. He can provide testimony regarding his family." Garrett Hollis rose sharply, his composure finally cracking. "This is convenient timing, wouldn't you say? This man appears exactly when Stone's case is collapsing, with cavalry escort no less. How do we know he's who he claims to be?" Daniel turned toward Hollis, his eyes blazing. "I can describe every scar on my brother's body, every story Marianne told about her childhood in Missouri, every detail of their courtship and marriage. I can tell you that John survived the war, only to die trying to build a life in this godforsaken territory. And I can tell you that if Marianne gave her daughter to anyone with her dying breath, it was because she trusted that person completely. My sister-in-law did not make decisions lightly." He crossed to where Jorah stood and stopped an arm's length away, his eyes moving from the warrior's scarred face down to the sleeping infant. "Tell me how she died," Daniel said quietly. "Tell me everything." Jorah met his gaze steadily and began to speak. He described finding the burned wagon, the arrow wounds, Marianne's final moments. He recounted her words exactly as she had spoken them, the desperate plea that Anna be raised as his own, that she bear her mother's name and know her mother's love even in death. He told Daniel about the 3-day journey to Redemption Ridge, about learning to care for an infant he had never expected to hold, about the promise that had changed everything. As he spoke, tears streamed down Daniel's face, carving clean lines through the dust. When Jorah finished, Daniel reached out slowly, asking permission with his eyes, before touching Anna's small hand where it rested against Jorah's chest. The baby stirred at the contact but did not wake. "Marianne was the strongest woman I ever knew," Daniel said, his voice thick with grief. "She survived losing her first pregnancy, survived John's deployments during the war, survived 3 years of drought and hardship trying to make that homestead work. If she chose you to raise her daughter, it was because she saw something in you that gave her peace in her final moments. And I will honor that choice." The room exploded with reaction. Hollis surged forward, his face twisted with rage. "This proves nothing. For all we know, these men are working together, manufacturing a story. Are you calling me a liar?" Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Are you suggesting I would dishonor my dead brother and his wife by fabricating testimony? I'm suggesting that Stone could have fed you details, convinced you of a false narrative," Hollis shot back. "Your grief makes you vulnerable to manipulation." One of the cavalry soldiers stepped forward, a lieutenant with 3 stripes on his sleeve and the hardened look of a man who had seen combat. "Sir, I accompanied Mr. Cole from Santa Fe at the request of the territorial marshal. I can verify his identity through official documentation. And I can tell you that we found the wagon site Mr. Stone described. 2 days north of here, burned wreckage, Apache arrows, evidence of attack exactly as reported. We also found a grave beneath a juniper tree with the name Marianne Cole carved into the bark. The words landed like artillery shells, each one destroying another piece of Hollis's carefully constructed case. Pierce leaned forward, his expression shifting from certainty to doubt. You found physical evidence corroborating Mr. Stone's account? Yes, sir, the lieutenant replied. We also recovered personal effects from the wagon, including letters addressed to Daniel Cole in Santa Fe from his brother John. The handwriting matches samples Mr. Cole provided. There's no doubt about the victims' identities or the circumstances of the attack. Hollis's face had gone pale, then flushed dark red. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he watched his case disintegrating. The child still needs a proper home, he said, his voice tight. Stone is still a drifter, still unsuitable. That's for the council to decide, Pierce interrupted. His eyes moved from Hollis to Jorah, reassessing everything he had heard. Mr. Cole, as the child's uncle, you have a legal claim. What is your position regarding her placement? Daniel looked at Jorah for a long moment, his eyes searching the warrior's face. My brother trusted his wife's judgment absolutely. If Marianne chose this man, then I trust her choice. I have no objection to Mr. Stone raising Anna. In fact, I support it completely. Sarah Hollis stood suddenly, her careful composure shattering. No, she cried out, her voice breaking. Please, we can give her everything. A real home, a mother's love, education, opportunities. Don't condemn her to a life of hardship when she could have so much more. For the first time, genuine emotion showed in her face, raw grief and longing that could not be faked. Elena Vasquez moved forward, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Hollis, she said gently, your desire for a child is understandable. But this child has a mother's wish to honor and family who support that wish. You cannot buy what Anna needs most, which is the keeping of a sacred promise. Sarah collapsed back into her seat, weeping openly now. Garrett moved to comfort her, but his face remained hard, calculating even in defeat. He was not a man who accepted loss gracefully, and everyone in the room could see the dangerous fury building behind his eyes. Judge Pierce conferred quietly with the other council members, their heads bent together in urgent discussion. After several minutes, Pierce raised his head and brought down his gavel. In light of new testimony and physical evidence, this council reverses its preliminary decision. We find that Jorah Stone acted honorably in rescuing the child Anna Cole and honoring her mother's dying wish. We further find that Daniel Cole's support of this arrangement carries significant weight as the child's closest living relative. Relief flooded through Jorah so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. Anna stirred against his chest, waking with a small cry, and he automatically began the gentle rocking that soothed her. Around him the crowd erupted in reaction, some cheering, others shouting protests, the room divided as sharply as it had been from the beginning. However, Pierce continued, raising his voice over the noise, we cannot ignore concerns about Mr. Stone's transient lifestyle and lack of stable residence. Therefore, we impose the following conditions. Mr. Stone must establish permanent residence within Redemption Ridge or its immediate vicinity. He must demonstrate consistent ability to provide for the child's material needs. And he will submit to quarterly reviews by this council for a period of 2 years to ensure Anna's welfare is being properly maintained. The conditions were restrictive, binding Jorah to a town and a life he had never wanted. But as he looked down at Anna, at her small face turned trustingly toward him, he knew he would accept any terms, bear any burden. I agreed to the council's conditions, he said clearly. Pierce nodded. Then this matter is settled. Anna Cole remains in the custody of Jorah Stone, subject to the conditions stated. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell for the final time. The crowd surged forward, some rushing to congratulate Jorah, others clustering around the devastated Hollis family. Daniel Cole approached Jorah slowly, his hand extended. "May I hold my niece?" Jorah carefully transferred Anna into Daniel's arms. The older man cradled her gently, tears falling freely now as he looked at the last piece of his brother's legacy. "She has his spirit," Daniel whispered. "I can feel it. And Marianne's courage. Thank you for keeping them both alive." "I only did what I promised," Jorah replied. "That's more than most men would do," Daniel said. He looked up, meeting Jorah's eyes. "I'll be staying in the territory for a while, settling Jon's affairs, claiming his homestead. I want to be part of Anna's life if you'll allow it." "She should know her family," Jorah agreed. "She should know where she comes from." Elena appeared beside them, her face bright with triumph. "Come," she said. "Let's get out of this madhouse before someone starts another argument. Anna needs to be fed and you need to rest." They pushed through the crowd toward the door, but before they could reach it, Garrett Hollis stepped into their path. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his voice low and venomous. "You think you've won, Stone. You think because the council ruled in your favor that this is over. But I don't accept defeat, not from men like you." "Mr. Hollis," Sheriff Callahan said warningly, appearing at his shoulder. "I suggest you go home and let this matter rest." "It will never rest," Hollis snarled. "That child should be mine. I have the means, the position, everything needed to raise her properly. And this drifter, this killer, he has nothing but a promise made to a dying woman who was probably delirious with pain. The council made the wrong decision, and I will prove it." Jorah shifted Anna back into his arms, his body positioning itself between her and Hollis instinctively. "The council has spoken. Anna stays with me. If you can't accept that, it's your burden to carry, not mine." Hollis stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Jorah and those immediately around them could hear. "I will destroy you, Stone. I will make your life in this town impossible. I will turn every decent person against you, make sure you can't find work, can't buy supplies, can't survive. And when you finally break, when you finally realize you can't provide for that child, I'll be waiting. And then she'll be mine." The threat hung in the air like poison. Callahan's hand moved to his gun, but Jorah remained perfectly still, his eyes locked on Hollis with the kind of calm that comes before violence. "If you threaten me again," Jorah said quietly, "if you threaten Anna's welfare in any way, I will respond. And you will not like my response." For a moment it seemed violence would erupt right there in the town hall. Then Sarah Hollis appeared, pulling at her husband's arm. "Garrett, please." "Let's go home." Hollis allowed himself to be led away, but his eyes never left Jorah, promising retribution, promising that the battle was far from over. The crowd parted for them, some following the wealthy rancher with sympathy, others with disappointment at his defeat. Outside the town hall, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Jorah stood on the boardwalk with Anna in his arms, Daniel and Elena flanking him, and felt the full weight of what he had won and what it would cost. He had custody of Anna, but he was now bound to Redemption Ridge, bound to quarterly reviews, bound to proving himself worthy to people who would be watching for any excuse to reverse the council's decision. And Garrett Hollis, powerful and vindictive, had just declared war. "What will you do now?" Daniel asked quietly. Jorah looked down at Anna, at her dark eyes, studying his face with infant curiosity. "I'll keep my promise," he said simply. "Whatever it takes." But as they walked toward Elena's boarding house, through streets filled with staring townspeople, as whispers followed in their wake like ghosts, Jorah knew the hardest battle still lay ahead. The council's ruling had given him legal custody, but it had not changed hearts or minds. Half the town still saw him as an unfit guardian, and Garrett Hollis's threat echoed in his mind like distant thunder promising storms to come. That night, as Anna slept peacefully in the cradle Elena had provided, Jorah sat by the window, watching the lights of Redemption Ridge flicker in the darkness. He had won the public reckoning, had proven his story true, had secured the right to raise Marianne Cole's daughter. But he could feel the town holding its breath, waiting for him to fail, waiting for proof that their doubts had been justified. And somewhere in the darkness beyond his window, Garrett Hollis was planning his revenge. The first week after the council's decision passed, with deceptive calm, like the stillness that settles over the desert before a dust storm tears the sky apart. Jorah Stone moved through Redemption Ridge with Anna strapped against his chest, learning the rhythms of fatherhood while simultaneously learning the complexities of a town that had judged him and found itself divided. He purchased supplies at Martha Cunningham's general store, enduring her tight-lipped service and the curious stares of other customers. He attended Sunday service at Reverend Hayes's church, sitting in the back pew while Anna dozed against his shoulder and the congregation whispered behind their hymnals. Elena Vasquez had helped him secure a small house on the eastern edge of town, a weathered structure that had belonged to a prospector who died without heirs. It needed repairs, but it had a solid roof and a stone fireplace and enough space for a man and a baby to build something resembling a life. Daniel Cole stayed in Redemption Ridge for those first days, helping Jorah fix broken shutters and patch holes in the walls, while Anna watched from a makeshift cradle, her dark eyes following their movements with infant fascination. "You're doing well with her," Daniel said one afternoon as they replaced rotted floorboards. "Better than I expected, honestly. Most men would be lost." "I am lost," Jorah admitted, hammering a nail with more force than necessary. "Every day I wonder if I'm doing something wrong, if she's eating enough, if that cough means she's sick or just normal baby sounds. Elena's been patient, but I feel like I'm stumbling through darkness, hoping I don't fall off a cliff." Daniel smiled slightly. "That's called being a parent. The fear never really goes away. You just learn to function despite it." But the calm shattered on the 8th day. Jorah had left Anna with Elena while he rode out to meet with a rancher named Tom Hartwell, who had offered him work as a scout for a cattle drive. The job would provide steady income, crucial for meeting the council's requirements. And Hartwell was one of the few men in the territory who seemed indifferent to the controversy surrounding Anna's custody. They met at Hartwell's ranch, discussed terms, and Jorah rode back toward Redemption Ridge, feeling something he had not felt in years. A fragile sense of hope for the future. He saw the smoke before he reached the town's outskirts. Black columns rising against the afternoon sky, too thick for cooking fires, too concentrated to be scattered accidents. His horse felt his tension and broke into a gallop without being spurred, racing through the streets toward Elena's boarding house. The building stood untouched, but a crowd had gathered in front of the general store, 2 blocks over, and the acrid smell of burning wood filled the air. Jorah dismounted at a run, pushing through the crowd until he saw what they were staring at. His house, the small structure he had spent a week making livable, was engulfed in flames. Fire poured from the windows and ate through the roof, consuming everything he owned except what he carried on his back and his horse. Sheriff Callahan stood near the bucket brigade, trying futilely to contain the blaze, his face grim with the knowledge that the building was already lost. "How did it start?" Jorah demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. Callahan turned, his expression troubled. "No one knows. It was burning when folks noticed it an hour ago. Could have been an accident, a spark from the fireplace." "There was no fire in the fireplace," Jorah said flatly. "I banked the coals this morning before I left. This was deliberate." "You can't know that," Callahan began, but his tone lacked conviction. They both knew the truth, knew that Garrett Hollis had meant every word of his threat. The fire was a message, a demonstration of power, a warning that Jorah's life in Redemption Ridge would be untenable. Martha Cunningham approached, her weathered face showing genuine concern. "The baby wasn't in there, was she?" "No," Jorah said, relief and fury warring in his chest. "She's with Elena." "Thank God for that," Martha said. "But Jorah, you've got nothing now. No home, no possessions. How will you provide for her?" The question was not accusatory but practical, and it cut deeper than any insult could have. Jorah watched his house collapse inward with a roar of timber and flame, watched the future he had been building turn to ash, and felt the weight of Hollis's strategy crushing down on him. The rancher was not trying to take Anna through legal means anymore. He was systematically destroying Jorah's ability to meet the council's conditions, forcing him to fail so the quarterly review would remove Anna from his custody. "This was Hollis," someone in the crowd muttered. "Everyone knows it. Prove it," another voice countered. "You can't just accuse the man without evidence." The crowd split into familiar factions, arguing while Jorah's home burned. He turned away, unable to watch anymore, and walked back toward Elena's boarding house. His mind raced through options, through the impossibility of his situation. He had no money to rebuild, no possessions to sell, and now his job offer with Hartwell would likely evaporate once the rancher heard about the fire and the controversy surrounding it. Elena met him at her door, Anna cradled in her arms. The older woman's face showed the same grim understanding that Jorah felt. "I saw the smoke," she said quietly. "Is it gone?" Jorah confirmed. "Everything, not everything," Elena said, pressing Anna into his arms. "You still have her. You still have your promise. The rest can be rebuilt, but rebuilding required resources and time, neither of which Jorah possessed. Over the next 3 days, he experienced the full force of Hollis's influence. Tom Hartwell sent a message cancelling the job offer, citing concerns about reliability. The boarding house that rented rooms to travelers suddenly had no vacancies when Jorah inquired about permanent lodging. The bank refused to extend credit for rebuilding. Everywhere he turned, doors closed, opportunities vanished. The town slowly squeezing him out through 1,000 small cruelties, orchestrated by one powerful man. Daniel Cole found him on the 4th day after the fire, sitting on the steps of Elena's boarding house with Anna asleep in his arms. The older man's face was tight with anger. "I've been asking around," Daniel said without preamble. 3 different people saw Hollis's foreman and 2 ranch hands near your house the morning of the fire, but no one will testify. They're all afraid of losing their jobs or facing Hollis's retaliation. Fear is a powerful weapon, Jorah said quietly. "So is truth," Daniel countered. "I'm going to the sheriff demanding an investigation." "Callahan won't do anything without witnesses," Jorah replied. "And even if he wanted to, Hollis has enough influence to block any official action. We're fighting a war we can't win through legal channels." Daniel sat beside him, silent for a long moment. "What will you do?" It was the question that had haunted Jorah since watching his house burn. The practical answer was clear. Leave Redemption Ridge. Take Anna somewhere Hollis's reach could not follow. Build a new life far from the man's vindictive fury. But leaving meant abandoning the council's conditions, meant losing custody, meant breaking the promise he had made to Marianne Cole. "I'll stay," Jorah said finally. "I'll find a way to meet the council's requirements, even if I have to live in a tent and work odd jobs. I won't give Hollis the satisfaction of driving me out." But that night, as he lay on a borrowed cot in Elena's storage room, with Anna sleeping in a drawer lined with blankets, doubt crept in like cold wind through cracks in a wall. He was a warrior, had survived battles and hardships that would have broken lesser men, but this enemy could not be fought with fists or guns. Hollis wielded power of a different kind, the power of wealth and influence and social position, and Jorah had no weapons that could match it. The attack came 3 days later, not with fire but with violence that threatened everything. Jorah had found temporary work helping at the livery stable, mucking stalls, and repairing tack for enough money to buy food and contribute to Elena's household. He worked with Anna, strapped to his back in the sling Elena had fashioned, the baby content to sleep or watch the horses while he labored. It was not dignified work for a man who had scouted for the cavalry and tracked Apache raiders. But it was honest and it kept them fed. He was finishing his shift as the sun set, preparing to walk back to Elena's boarding house, when 4 men stepped out of the shadows near the stable entrance. Jorah recognized 2 of them as Hollis's ranch hands, hard men with reputations for brutality. The other 2 were drifters, the kind who would do anything for money and ask no questions about morality or law. "Jorah Stone," the lead ranch hand said, his voice carrying false friendliness. "Mr. Hollis wants to talk to you. He's got a proposition." Jorah's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but he stopped himself. Anna was on his back, vulnerable, and drawing his weapon with her there was impossible. "I've got nothing to say to Hollis," he replied, shifting his body to protect Anna. "That's a shame," the ranch hand said, stepping closer. "Because Mr. Hollis is a generous man when folks are reasonable. He's offering you $500 to leave town and surrender the baby to proper care. That's more money than you'll see in a year of shoveling horse manure." "Not interested," Jorah said flatly. The ranch hand's expression hardened. "See, that's the problem with you, Stone. You don't know when you're beaten. You lost your house. You lost your prospects. You're living on charity and doing work a Mexican laborer would refuse. What kind of life is that for a baby? Better than being raised by a man who sends thugs to threaten people in the dark," Jorah shot back. The ranch hand's hand dropped to his gun. "Careful with your words. Accidents happen to men who don't know their place. Touch that weapon, and you'll regret it," a voice called from behind Jorah. Dr. Abraham Walsh stepped out of the stable's back entrance, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "I've been treating a sick horse in there and heard every word. You boys want to explain to the sheriff why you're threatening a man holding a baby?" The ranch hands hesitated, weighing their orders against the doctor's presence. Finally, the leader spat in the dust. "This isn't over, Stone. Mr. Hollis always gets what he wants. Always." They melted back into the shadows, leaving Jorah and Walsh alone. The doctor lowered his shotgun, his expression troubled. "This is escalating. Hollis isn't going to stop with intimidation. Next time it might be worse." "I know," Jorah said, his voice tight. "But what choice do I have? Run and lose Anna? Fight and risk her getting hurt in the crossfire?" "There's always a choice," Walsh said. "Sometimes they're all bad, but they exist." That night, Jorah barely slept. He lay on his cot with Anna beside him, listening to every sound outside Elena's boarding house, his gun within reach, despite knowing he could not use it with the baby so close. His mind churned through scenarios, through possibilities, through the growing certainty that this situation would end in violence, no matter how carefully he tried to avoid it. The crisis came the following evening. Jorah was walking back from the general store with supplies Elena had requested, Anna secured in her sling, when he saw smoke rising from the boarding house. Not the thick black smoke of a major fire, but enough to indicate something was burning. He broke into a run, his heart hammering, arriving to find Elena and her few other boarders standing in the street while smoke poured from a second-floor window. "Someone threw a torch through the window," Elena said, her voice shaking with fury and fear. "Rode past and threw it without even slowing down. If I hadn't been awake, the whole building could have gone up." Sheriff Callahan arrived minutes later, his face grim as he examined the damage. The fire had been contained to one room, but the message was clear. Hollis was escalating, moving from burning Jorah's property to threatening anyone who helped him. Elena's boarding house was no longer safe. "You need to leave town tonight," Callahan said quietly, pulling Jorah aside. "Take the baby and ride out. I'll delay reporting this, give you a head start. Go to Santa Fe, to California, anywhere but here. Hollis has gone mad with this obsession, and I can't protect you." "Running makes me guilty," Jorah said. "Makes it look like I stole Anna, like everything Hollis claimed was true. Better guilty and alive than right and dead," Callahan countered. "That baby needs you breathing, not buried." Jorah looked at Anna, at her small face peaceful, despite the chaos surrounding them. He thought of Marianne Cole dying in the desert, thought of the promise that had bound him, thought of everything he had endured to keep that promise alive. Running meant betraying all of it, meant letting Hollis win through intimidation and violence. But staying meant risking Anna's life along with his own. The decision was made for him an hour later when Daniel Cole burst into Elena's boarding house, his face white with shock. "They took her," he gasped. "Sarah Hollis came to where I was staying, claimed she wanted to apologize, to see Anna one last time. I let her hold the baby for just a moment, and then Garrett's men were there, taking Anna from her arms, riding away before I could stop them." The world tilted sideways. Jorah felt his chest constrict, felt rage and terror flooding through him in equal measure. "Where did they go?" "The Hollis Ranch," Daniel said. "They're holding her there, claiming they're protecting her from an unsafe environment. Garrett sent word that if you want her back, you'll have to come take her. It was a trap, obvious and brutal. Hollis was daring Jorah to attack his ranch, to use violence to reclaim Anna, thereby proving all the accusations about his unfitness. And if Jorah died in the attempt, so much the better. Either way, Hollis would win." "I'm going," Jorah said, his voice cold as winter iron. "Tonight." "That's suicide," Callahan protested. "He'll have a dozen armed men waiting, then I'll go through a dozen armed men," Jorah replied. He began checking his weapons, his movements methodical and precise, the warrior rising to the surface after days of trying to be something softer. "I made a promise to Marianne Cole, and I'm keeping it. If that means war with Garrett Hollis, then that's what it means." Elena grabbed his arm. "You can't shoot your way into a fortified ranch. You'll be killed before you reach the house." "I don't plan to shoot my way in," Jorah said. "I plan to make Hollis realize that taking Anna was the worst mistake he ever made." He turned toward the door, toward the darkness and the violence waiting beyond it, toward a confrontation that would determine Anna's future and his own. The Hollis Ranch sat 3 miles west of Redemption Ridge, a sprawling compound of buildings surrounded by split-rail fencing and dominated by a main house that proclaimed wealth and permanence. Jorah Stone approached it on foot through the darkness, leaving his horse tethered a mile back to avoid detection. He moved like smoke through the scrub brush and mesquite, every sense alert, his years of scouting returning as naturally as breathing. The moon hung low and full, providing enough light to navigate by, but also making him visible if he was careless. Daniel Cole and Dr. Walsh had insisted on coming with him despite his protests. They flanked him now, moving with less grace but equal determination. Callahan had refused to participate officially, but had made it clear he would be nearby if shooting started, protecting what he called the integrity of the law while tacitly acknowledging that the law had failed. Elena remained in town, spreading word of what Hollis had done, rallying those who still believed in justice over power. As they crept closer to the ranch buildings, Jorah could see guards posted at intervals, silhouettes against lamplight, rifles visible. Hollis had prepared for confrontation, turning his home into a fortress. But fortresses had weaknesses, and Jorah had spent years finding them. "The bunkhouses on the east side," Daniel whispered. "Most of the ranch hands will be there, if we can get to the main house without alerting them." "We're not sneaking in," Jorah said quietly. "That's what Hollis expects, what he's prepared for. We're going to walk up to his front door and demand Anna back." Walsh stared at him. "That's insane. His men will shoot us before we reach the porch." "Not if the whole town is watching," Jorah replied. He pointed back toward the road where lanterns were beginning to appear, a procession of lights moving toward the ranch. Elena had worked faster than he expected, rousing townspeople from their homes, telling them that Garrett Hollis had kidnapped an infant, that he was holding her hostage at his ranch. Some came out of outrage, others from curiosity. But they came, dozens of them, creating an audience that Hollis could not ignore. Reverend Hayes rode at the front of the procession, his face grave but determined. Martha Cunningham walked beside him, along with other townspeople who had defended Jorah at the hearing, and some who had opposed him but drew the line at child theft. The crowd swelled as it approached the ranch, voices rising in a confused murmur of anger and questions. The guards at the ranch entrance raised their rifles uncertainly, faced with not a single warrior they could shoot, but a mob of their neighbors, demanding answers. Jorah stepped forward from the darkness, his voice carrying across the compound. "Garrett Hollis took my daughter. I want her back. Now." The front door of the main house opened, and Hollis emerged, his face illuminated by lamplight, his expression a careful mask of calm reason. Sarah stood behind him, her arms wrapped around herself, her face showing the strain of their escalating desperation. "Your daughter?" Hollis called back. "You mean the child you've been unable to provide for? The child who's been living in unsafe conditions?" I've taken her into protective custody for her own welfare. You have no authority to take any child, Reverend Hayes said, his voice thundering with moral outrage. What you've done is kidnapping, pure and simple. Return the baby to Mr. Stone immediately. I will not hand a helpless infant back to a man who's proven himself unfit, Hollis replied. His confidence was returning, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when addressing his ranch hands. Stone has no home, no stable income, no ability to meet the council's conditions. I'm doing what the council should have done from the beginning. The council made its decision, Judge Pierce's voice cut through the crowd. The old judge pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. I may have had doubts about Mr. Stone, but you have no right to override a legal ruling. You've committed a crime, Hollis, and you will answer for it. The crowd pressed forward, their mood shifting from confusion to anger. Hollis's guards looked at each other nervously, unwilling to fire on people they knew, people whose children played with their own. The rancher's carefully constructed power was crumbling as he faced something he could not buy or intimidate. You're all fools, Hollis snarled, his mask finally slipping. That child deserves better than a killer raising her. She deserves a proper home, a real family, everything I can provide. And you'd hand her over to a drifter who'll be dead or gone within a year. That's not your decision to make, Jorah said, stepping into the lamplight fully. His hand rested on his gun, not drawing but making clear his readiness. You can justify this however you want, tell yourself you're doing right, but the truth is you wanted something and decided to take it. That's not protection, that's theft. Sarah Hollis suddenly pushed past her husband, her face twisted with anguish. Stop, she cried out. Just stop all of this. Garrett, this isn't right. I wanted a child, God knows I did, but not like this. Not stolen, not taken by force. Sarah, get back inside, Hollis commanded. No, she said, her voice breaking. I won't be part of this anymore. That baby has been crying for hours. She wants her father. She wants the man who's cared for her, who's kept her alive, who's honored her mother's dying wish. We can't give her that no matter how much money we have. She disappeared into the house and emerged moments later carrying Anna. The baby was indeed crying, her small face red and tear-streaked, her body trembling with distress. Sarah walked down the porch steps slowly, tears streaming down her own face, and crossed the yard toward Jorah. The crowd parted for her, silent now, watching this moment of surrender. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered as she placed Anna in Jorah's arms. I'm so sorry. I let my desperation cloud my judgment. She's yours. She was always yours. Jorah took Anna with shaking hands, feeling her small body press against him. Hearing her cries shift from distress to relief as she recognized his scent, his heartbeat, his presence. He held her close, one hand supporting her head, whispering soothing words he had learned over their weeks together. The baby's cries gradually subsided into hiccuping sobs, then into exhausted silence as she clung to him. Garrett Hollis stood on his porch, alone now, his wife having abandoned his cause, his guards refusing to act. His power revealed as hollow when faced with simple human decency. This isn't over, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Sheriff Callahan said, stepping forward with his hand on his pistol. Garrett Hollis, you're under arrest for kidnapping. You'll stand trial before Judge Pierce, and we'll see how your money and influence hold up against the law. Two deputies moved forward to take Hollis into custody. The rancher did not resist, his shoulders sagging as the reality of his actions crashed down on him. He had overreached, had let obsession drive him beyond the boundaries of what even his wealth could protect him from. As the deputies led him away, Sarah collapsed onto the porch steps, weeping, her dreams of motherhood shattered by her husband's ruthless ambition. The crowd began to disperse, their drama concluded, their excitement fading into the mundane task of walking home in darkness. But several people approached Jorah first. Martha Cunningham touched Anna's small hand gently. I was wrong about you, she said simply. You've proven yourself a good father. That baby is lucky to have you. Judge Pierce cleared his throat awkwardly. The quarterly reviews will continue as mandated, but I expect they'll show what we've all witnessed tonight. You're committed to that child, Stone. That counts for more than wealth or stability. Reverend Hayes extended his hand. I judged you by your past, rather than your present character. That was a failure of Christian charity on my part. You're welcome in my church any time, you and Anna both. Jorah accepted their words with quiet gratitude, too exhausted and emotionally drained to process the magnitude of what had shifted. He had come to the ranch prepared for violence, for a battle that would have ended in blood and tragedy. Instead, he had witnessed something more powerful, the collapse of corruption when faced with community standing together. Daniel Cole approached last, his eyes glistening with tears. Marianne would be proud, he said. She chose well. You've honored her wish in ways she couldn't have imagined. I only kept my promise, Jorah replied. That's everything, Daniel said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. I've been to Santa Fe, settled John's affairs. He left his homestead to Marianne, and she left everything to Anna. That's 200 acres of decent land, with a spring, some timber, enough to build a real life. It's yours now, to hold in trust for her until she's grown. The implications took a moment to register. Land meant permanence, meant the ability to meet the council's conditions without depending on the charity of others. It meant a future that extended beyond day-to-day survival. I don't know how to ranch, Jorah said. You'll learn, Eleanor said, appearing at his side. And you'll have help. This town owes you better than what you've received. There are men who'll teach you about cattle and crops, women who'll help with Anna as she grows. You're not alone anymore, Jorah Stone, even if you spent years trying to be. Over the following weeks, Redemption Ridge transformed around Jorah in subtle ways. The hostility that had met him initially softened into acceptance and even respect. Tom Hartwell renewed his job offer, this time with better terms and flexibility, to allow Jorah to care for Anna. The bank extended credit for building materials. Volunteers appeared at the homestead Daniel had deeded over, helping to repair the old cabin and construct outbuildings. Garrett Hollis stood trial and was convicted of kidnapping, sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison. His ranch was sold to pay legal fees and restitution. Sarah Hollis left the territory entirely, returning to her family in the east, her letters to friends speaking of shame and regret. The Hollis empire, built on ruthless ambition, crumbled in months. Jorah spent his days learning to be both father and farmer, balancing Anna's needs with the brutal work of carving a life from unforgiving land. The first year was hardest, marked by failures and setbacks and moments of doubt so profound he wondered if everyone had been right about his unsuitability. But Anna grew stronger, her infant fragility giving way to the robust health of a toddler learning to walk and explore. Her first word was "Da," spoken while clutching his leg for balance, and Jorah wept as openly as he had the day Marianne Cole died. Daniel Cole visited regularly, teaching Jorah about his brother's farming methods and telling Anna stories about her parents she was too young to understand, but would remember someday. Elena became a grandmother in all but blood, spending afternoons teaching Anna songs and helping Jorah navigate the mysteries of childhood illnesses and temperamental moods. The community that had judged him so harshly became the support structure that made survival possible. The quarterly reviews became formalities. Judge Pierce would arrive, inspect the homestead, observe Anna's obvious health and happiness, and file reports noting satisfactory progress. After the first year, he admitted the reviews were unnecessary. You've exceeded every expectation, Pierce said. That child is thriving, and you've built something real here. The council will formally end its oversight at the 2-year mark. But the true measure of change came not from official recognition, but from small moments that accumulated into meaning. Anna's first birthday, celebrated with half the town attending and bringing gifts they could barely afford. Ina's second Christmas, when she toddled around the cabin laughing at decorations Eleanor had helped create. Anna's third spring, when she planted seeds in a garden patch and waited with impossible patience for them to grow. On the anniversary of finding Marianne Cole in the desert, Jorah rode north with Anna strapped in a saddle before him. They traveled for 3 days until they reached the juniper tree, where he had buried her mother. The grave was undisturbed, the name carved in bark still legible. Jorah lifted Anna down and knelt beside her. "This is your mother," he said, his rough hands gentle on her small shoulders. "Her name was Marianne Cole, and she was the bravest person I ever met. She fought to keep you alive when everything else was dying around her. And she asked me to raise you, to keep you safe, to make sure you knew you were loved." Anna looked at the grave with solemn eyes, too young to fully comprehend death, but old enough to understand importance. "Mama," she said, the word careful and precious. "Yes," Jorah confirmed, his throat tight. "Your mama. And she would be so proud of you." They stayed for an hour, Jorah telling Anna stories about her parents, based on what Daniel had shared and what he had witnessed in Marianne's final moments. He made a promise then, standing over the grave of the woman who had changed his life, that Anna would always know where she came from, would always carry her mother's name and her mother's courage. As they rode back toward home, toward the life they had built together against impossible odds, Jorah felt something he had not experienced in his years of warfare and wandering. He felt peace, not the absence of conflict, but something deeper, the knowledge that his life had meaning beyond survival, that he had honored a sacred promise and been transformed by it. Anna fell asleep against his chest as they rode, her small body trusting him completely, her breathing steady and content. The warrior who had lived for violence had become the father who lived for her laughter. The drifter who had belonged nowhere had become the man who belonged to a child, and a promise, and a community that had learned to see past his scars. Years later, when Anna was old enough to ask questions about her origins, Jorah would tell her the full story. He would describe the desert storm, and her mother's dying plea, and the promise that had bound them together. He would tell her about the town that had doubted them, and the battle they had fought not with weapons, but with persistence and love. And he would tell her that she was the reason he had learned what it meant to be fully human. But for now, riding through the New Mexico sunset with his daughter sleeping against him, Jorah Stone simply held her close and whispered the words that had become his prayer, his vow, his reason for living. "I kept my promise, Marianne. I raised her as my own, and I always will." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. And somewhere in that vast and unforgiving landscape, the ghost of a dying widow finally rested, knowing her daughter would grow up loved, protected, and forever aware of the promise that had saved her life. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.